So hello, everyone, wherever you may be. It is with excitement that I welcome you all to this keynote panel on diversity in archaeology. Our purpose here is to have an honest, intersectional conversation on diversity, to be disruptive, fruitfully controversial, and to encourage change. So this conversation, of course, would not be possible without our 5 keynote speakers, whom I will be introducing very shortly, and without the audience that is here with us today and whom we hope to inspire. My name is Mariana. I am from the Macanese community in Macau, China, and a PhD candidate at the Cambridge Heritage Research Center, and I will be the chair for this panel. A big shout out to Oliver, Izzy, and Taryn for their perspectives and wisdom in putting this panel together. There is a live transcript of this panel, and it is on your left side of the screen. On the upper part, it says Otter AI. And if you click on it, and if you go to view stream on Otter AI, you'll be able to see the transcript, okay? So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 5 speakers. Shadreck Chirikure, who holds a British Academy Global Professorship at the University of Oxford. Professor, would you like to say hello?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nice meeting you.
Thank you so much. Alex Fitzpatrick, who has just completed her PhD at the University of Bradford. Hello, Alex.
Hi.
Hello.
That's it.
Then Laura Heath-Stout, a postdoctoral researcher at Emory University.
Hello.
Hello, Laura. And Sophie Jorgensen-Rideout, a PhD researcher at Monrepos in Germany.
Hi.
Hello, Sophie. And Dr. William White, Bill, who is an assistant professor at the University of California.
Hello.
Hello. So following the presentation of our invited speakers and the discussion, I encourage our audience today to get involved in the conversation. So please send us questions at any time, and we will do our best to address them. Okay, so I would like now to ask for a round of virtual applause for our first speaker. Professor Shadreck Chirikure is a professor and former head of department at the University of Cape Town and holds a British Academy Global Professorship at the University of Oxford. His recent research explores the pre-colonial urban landscapes of South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Mapungubwe. Professor, please, your presentation.
Thank you, and thanks once again for the opportunity to share my thoughts with colleagues from different parts of the world. And indeed, I'm looking forward to learning from all of you, particularly when we have the discussions. They say once a student, always a student. So that applies also to me. So the title of the conversation, which I'm going to be having with us today, or you may call it using Mariana's language, the talk, is achieving diversity through Africanizing archaeology. And that is for a reason, simply because if we were to take a more general take on the field of archaeology and to think of, if we were to have our model of an archaeologist whom we would say, well, this is the most successful archaeologist, right? Who ticks all the boxes, they do cool research, cool science, they publish in Nature and Science. How many Africans could make it to that list? So I will come back to this question towards the end. Just to say that archaeology in Africa as in other previously colonized regions, came as a result of imperialism or as a result of colonialism. So it did not have any local roots. It was imposed, and men and very few women from the former colonial powers, Berlin, London, Paris, and so on. Those are the ones who were introducing the discipline in my region of interest, which is Africa. So archaeology then emerged as part of what later on became disaster capitalism. It was associated with plunder. It was associated with violence. And there are many examples in Africa that one can draw from. So the Benin bronzes, the siege of Benin in 1897 by the British Army, which resulted in the scattering of hundreds of objects from Berlin in different Western museums, is one example. Then there's also the imperial plunder of Egypt, going back even to Napoleonic times. And also, if we were to shift attention to another region of Africa, this time the southern, we realize that Cecil John Rhodes, one of the people involved in imperialism, took a keen interest in Great Zimbabwe, and Great Zimbabwe and some of its artifacts, such as the soapstone beds, they became fundamental emblems of Cecil John Rhodes. That is why one of the soapstone beds from Great Zimbabwe is decorating Rhodes' house in Oxford. So that's that thing which sits on top of Rhodes' house. It is a replica of the soapstone beds from Great Zimbabwe. So the reason why I'm giving this background is that is to demonstrate the point that when archaeology then began, it had nothing to do with local people. It had very little to do with their interests. It was all about, people who were coming from the former metropoles looking for wealth. And if knowledge production was the result, then my argument is that it was an unintended result. So the power structures then were skewed in favor of people with money. So it's Cecil John Rhodes who is sponsoring people to excavate Great Zimbabwe. The narratives are supposed to meet or to suit what Cecil John Rhodes wanted, right? Because the world, even in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was patriarchal. We also don't see any women, even those are from Europe. But what is also interesting is that we see the appropriation of the African past, to suit Cecil John Rhodes' imperial desires and so on. But we also see the marginalization and exclusion of Africans from their own past. So the first books to be produced on Great Zimbabwe, they were presented in London and never in the colonies. The colonies started participating or consuming archaeology after the 1960s, when calls for independence gathered a momentum. That is when people then started to say, oh, but this is our heritage. We must also participate in its production. So that is something that was also perpetuated by professional archaeology still during the colony, particularly the days of the new archaeology from the 1950s onwards, where the idea of archaeology as a science, where you develop models, which you have to validate, you test hypotheses to produce general laws that you can apply everywhere. So because local knowledge could not be verified in a way that modern science wanted, that was challenged for being unscientific. And there were these models which were then produced, and some of them, they are still dominant in Southern Africa. particularly what is known as the central kettle pattern, and also what is known as the Zimbabwe pattern, which are very rigid and monolithic models that has everything that is Western and very little that is African. So the interesting thing then is that we then see a lack of diversity in the sense that although local people were contributing information to the development of those models, to interpretation, they are never regarded as experts. Experts has to be, from a specific race. They have to be trained at a specific university, graduates from Oxford, graduates from Cambridge, and so on. So marginalization, exclusion, that's a theme that runs up to today. What is also interesting, which would be my last point, is that the emergence of post-processualism. So Ian Hodder's very symbolic, seminal publication, Symbols in Action. The site of study was the Baringo area in Kenya. So this is Africa, right? And the idea of multiple interpretation is also very important. But why is it that in archaeology, global archaeology, those views from communities and others who are interested in the past, particularly certainly from Africa, we don't see them influencing the theoretical movements or interpretation in the discipline. So this again highlights the fact that to a large extent, archaeology is extractive. Although the concerns of post-processualism, as enunciated by Ian Hodder, appealed to the long-suffering and marginalized people in Africa, but that discourse has been appropriated. It has been centered in London, in Paris, in New York, such that the local people, they can't claim it. They are not part of networks of that control funding, networks that control publishing of journals, reviews. I'm an editor myself, so I know how it works. So they are outside all those networks. So to some extent, then every one of us, we say we want to talk diversity. We want to achieve diversity. We want to be inclusive. And yet there are so many barriers to inclusivity. There are so many barriers to achieving that diversity. So Cambridge University, Oxford, and all these other big universities, Harvard, they have trained so many African students. Why aren't not some of them on their faculty? Are they only as good as students, but not as good as professors? You should not count me because I studied at University College London, so I belong here for the purposes of this argument. So you should not count me. So the idea then is that we need to really be sincere when we talk about diversity, and to ensure that the numbers matters. Let us talk diversity, and that diversity in terms of race, sex, ethnicity, and so on must also be reflected in what we do and in what we talk about. It is not just good to say, look, let us achieve diversity, and then nothing happens, or we only co-opt a few, and those few serve as tokens to say, yeah, we have 1, 2 people who are, so we have diversity. We have to be meaningful in all this. Let me end here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was powerful, that was important, and I hope we can pick up on several of these topics. And now I'm going to give space for our next presenter, who is Alex. Alex Fitzpatrick has just completed her PhD at the University of Bradford, specializing in zooarchaeology. Alex hosts the podcast Archaeoanimals and uses social media to increase public knowledge of the challenges facing international students in the UK, efforts to decolonize archaeology, and the mental health crisis in academia. Alex, thank you so much.
Can't believe after Professor Chirikure's amazing talk that I am now going to talk for 10 minutes about myself. So apologies on that. Hold on, let me share my screen so you can see my really good slides. So yeah, this is going to be my talk for the next 10 minutes. So when I was first approached to speak at this conference, of course, first of all, I was like, why? Have you seen me and my Twitter? But yeah, the only thing I could really think of when I was asked, talk about whatever you want when it comes to diversity, I realized, I don't have any hard facts, so I'm just going to speak from personal experience. So yeah, this short talk comes entirely from my personal experience, the trials and tribulations of being a mentally ill Asian American migrant in British archaeology. It's a long title, I just realized. And, there's going to be no hard data. There's going to be nothing, no citations besides things that I've experienced. And I just kind of want to use this as an example of like the ways in which a lot of different marginalizations can intersect with each other. And it's not necessarily just, one issue type thing. Audre Lorde once said, we don't live single issue lives. And I think when you discuss diversity, you also have to, come at it with that perspective in mind as well. So yeah. This is, so this slide represents what it's like to be an Asian in British archaeology. I feel like I don't really have to talk much. The slide kind of speaks for itself. This is basically just a small sampling of the things that I've gotten sent to me over the past year. I get a lot of hate mail. And, this is literally just the what I get just for being very open about and extremely loud about my experiences in, British archaeology and feeling a bit alienated and somewhat unsupported by my, overwhelmingly white group of colleagues. I really don't think I say anything very controversial other than, there's a lot of white people who work in British archaeology. And, the fact that just saying that kind of statement, which is actually, backed up by surveys. I think the most recent one from 2013 showed that the British archaeology workforce was about 99% white. It's not necessarily an opinion. It's what the workforce is like. And just saying that gets you all this kind of, nice messages from people. Of course, especially a lot of people on this panel, people who are watching, I don't have to tell you that. You all probably know from your own experiences what it's like. This is me preaching to the choir, really. So I kind of didn't really want to focus too much on this and instead kind of focus a bit more on kind of my experiences as a migrant who does archaeology in Britain, and also as a mentally ill person who does archaeology. So yeah, it's being a migrant in British archaeology, I think I don't really see much talk about it. It's obviously slightly connected to the kind of racism I've experienced. And I think people don't realize the huge impact your migration status has on not just obviously as an archaeologist, but just on academia, as an academic myself. So just a quick primer, obviously this is very British centric, but of course the border regime is horrible everywhere for the most part. In Britain, the immigration system is literally called the hostile environment. That is literally how it was pitched when it was originally introduced in 2015 by Theresa May. It's not a kind of opinion. That's literally how the government wanted to approach immigration. They wanted to make it as hostile as possible for migrants. So there are extremely strict limitations on life for migrants, depending on your visa, of course. So right now I'm on a student visa, and I get very limited support from my university. when I do field work, I have much more paperwork than my colleagues. I have to fill out paperwork for the home office, especially if you go abroad. There's so much more work that you have to do just to prove, that you're going to come back. And I can't, but in terms of free labor, because I need the paid work, I have hard restrictions on my working hours, which makes doing a lot of my work really, really difficult. I get very limited hours. Right now I'm on 20 hours a week. How can you survive on that, especially when you're a PhD student and you either get paid pennies, or if you're me being a genius, you're self-funded, because I love student debt, apparently. And as a finishing PhD, I'm facing even more issues as someone who is, 1 foot still in, PhD student mode, and I'm trying to get my bearing on, kind of entering the academic world, as a quote unquote, like professional. Being on a student visa means I'm eligible for loads of jobs. If you follow me on Twitter, I actually had a bit of a thread about this. There's a post going around for a zoo archaeologist that many people have sent me saying, you'll probably be great for this. You should go apply for this. And I can't, because 1, I'm on a student visa. I legally cannot work full time. And 2, they won't sponsor work visas. So, and unfortunately, that's the case for a lot of institutions. I won't say what institution it is, but I actually was lined up for a interview at a museum that is pretty big. And they canceled my interview when they found out that I wasn't on a work visa right now, and I didn't have full working privileges. And they said that they would not be able to give me a worker's visa if I was able to get the job. And it's a big institution. They should be able to do that. It's not necessarily as hard as I think some people believe it is, but that a lot of these jobs ultimately are saying, if you're this certain type of migrant, you're not allowed to even apply for this job. And again, that works with archaeology, in that most commercial archaeology organizations here in the UK will not sponsor migrants for work visas. Again, necessarily just barring migrants from even applying for these jobs. And as a professional, which I can't really speak from for personal experience, but a couple of years ago, Jen Wexler, who is an archaeologist who works at the British Museum, she was facing deportation because she technically spent too much time out researching. And there is an amount of time you're allowed to spend outside of the country when you're still on a visa. And of course, we all work at different places. We all have to travel for our research. She's working at the British Museum. You can't expect us to not spend some time out of the country. And it almost, she almost got deported for it. There's all these huge barriers that I don't think people really even think about when it comes to thinking about, when we think about diversifying archaeology, no one necessarily really thinks about immigration and those kind of impacts. And in the pandemic, of course, as well, we've had migrant students are now destitute. None of us can access public funding. It's a huge issue, and I'm hoping that more people will start talking about it. So just to kind of really quickly wrap up, because I might be close to 10 minutes, just kind of what's it like to be mentally ill and doing archaeology? So all that I've already talked about obviously causes a lot of stress, and I have mental illness, so that doesn't help either. And I just want to specifically talk about 2 of my lowest points during my PhD. And just to start off, I have an anxiety disorder and I have a severe depression. And this obviously affects all aspects of my life, archaeology included. So when I first started my PhD, I just left an abusive relationship and I fell into a really deep depressive episode that resulted in me literally going missing for a few months. No one knew where I was. I wasn't going to university. I ended up having loads of people check my house to make sure that I was, still around. And luckily I had supervisors who actually cared, and they reached out, made sure I was okay. They intervened, made sure I got medical help, and gave myself the time I needed to take care of myself before I returned to my PhD. And I don't know what I would have done without their support. And the second moment is during fieldwork in 2018. I was away from everyone. We had a very small fieldwork team for excavation up in Scotland, and I was just extremely depressed. I wasn't going to site due to a site injury, so I was stuck by myself doing kind of, post-ex work alone. And I think just kind of being alone ended up resulting in kind of the creation of a hashtag called Digging While Depressed, which I kind of used to talk about, there was something that I never really saw anyone else talk about. It was like, we go on field work all the time. We're very isolated. Even when you're on field work with lots of people, you're working in trenches alone, you're far away from your loved ones for long periods of time, and this commercial and academic archaeology. And it got a bit of a dialogue going on, and it made me really excited to kind of explore this a bit further. And again, this is something that I hope we talk about a bit more, is, there is a diversity of people with disabilities and chronic illnesses and neurodivergence, and we don't necessarily talk about that when we talk about diversity. So I think these are, two aspects that I think I would like people to talk about a bit more moving forward. And again, I hope this talk was a bit of a gentle reminder of the ways that marginalization intersects with each other, and that it's not just one thing, and we have to be, it's a very complex issue sometimes, and to move forward, we really need to kind of, see all these facets of oppression that will be faced as a discipline. So I think that's about it for me. Just gonna stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing such a personal, intense story and experiences. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very well. So I'm going to go into our next speaker, who is Laura Heath-Stout. Is a postdoctoral researcher at Emory University, focusing on sexism, racism, heteronormativity, classism, give me 1 minute. Ableism, is it how you pronounce it? Yeah. In archaeology. So Laura is currently working on a new book entitled Identity, Oppression, and Diversity in Archaeology, Career Arcs, to be published by Routledge. Laura, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. I am joining you from the other Cambridge, the newer Cambridge, the very, very young Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's on the colonized lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket peoples. And so I acknowledge their stewardship of this land that I'm on. I took the opportunity of being told you can talk about anything about diversity in archaeology, which I've been studying for the last 5 years and thinking about longer. I thought to write this essay that's been sort of bouncing around in my head for a while about them titling Who Carries the Buckets? So I'm going to talk about buckets. And if you would like to read along how I actually wrote it and not how the AI otter is picking me up, you can download a docx version of the talk from my website. I just put the link in the chat. Who carries the buckets? In my first summer working on the Proyecto Arqueológico Tepeticpac in Tlaxcala, Mexico, I had a friendly battle of wills with a man named Huicho. For several weeks, we dug a 2x2 meter pozo de sondeo in a place where we expected there to be very shallow stratigraphy, but instead we found almost 3 meters of fill. In those weeks, Huicho did not let me carry a single bucket of dirt to the screen. The moment I reached for the handle of a bucket, he was there, taking it out of my hands with a friendly smile. It really bugged me. Huicho did have much stronger arms than I did, but I was capable of carrying a 5-gallon bucket of dirt a couple of meters to the screen. Did he think I couldn't? Was it because I'm a woman? Did he think women are weak? In my graduate theory seminar taught by the late, great Mary Beaudry to my cohort of 9 women and 1 man, he got an earful. Cairo was there. We read Joan Jarrow's 1985 article, Sociopolitics and the Woman at Home Ideology, and discussed how archaeological fieldwork is coded as masculine. Men go out into the world and do the rugged manual labor, and then bring home the artifacts to women, who do the housework of cleaning and organizing in the lab. We cataloged all the ways we have felt unwelcome on field sites, from endemic sexual harassment to ubiquitous microaggressions, like having buckets and other heavy objects taken out of our hands. It was a cathartic experience, a kind of consciousness-raising group in which Mary assured us and we assured each other that we weren't imagining it. We were women in a deeply patriarchal discipline. Daryl Wing Su, the author of the book Microaggressions in Everyday Life, defines microaggressions as, quote, brief everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership, end quote. Microaggressions are commonly compared to paper cuts, in that each one is a tiny irritation, but 1,000 would make you bleed to death. Another common metaphor is the mosquito bite, which carries the same significance, but it adds the symbolism of some mosquitoes carrying deadly diseases. A man taking a bucket out of a woman's hands once is not just okay, it's teamwork. When it happens over and over again with every single bucket, though, it, quote, sends a denigrating message, end quote. It's sexist. For my dissertation research on sexism, heterosexism, and racism in archaeology, I interviewed a diverse group of 72 archaeologists about their experiences and perceptions of these issues. I heard the bucket story over and over again from women interviewees, especially those conducting fieldwork in Latin America and the Mediterranean or the Middle East. I came to expect it. One of my mentors, a qualitative sociologist, told me that I should keep interviewing until I reached saturation, which I would recognize when I started correctly predicting what my interviewees would say. When I started correctly predicting the bucket story, I stopped scheduling interviews with white women. Let me repeat that. I stopped scheduling interviews with white women. The bucket story was common among white women specifically. I have several ideas of why this might be, none of which I can prove. Maybe the women of color I interviewed spent less time talking about specifically sexist microaggressions because they had so much to say about race. Maybe it's that white women are more likely than our women of color colleagues to be the recipients of chivalrous sexism. Maybe it's that many of the women of color I interviewed worked on historical archaeology projects in the US that were less likely to hire local workers than large-scale Latin American and Mediterranean projects. And it was those local workers who were the bucket takers. The bucket takers aren't usually our highly educated male archaeologist peers, you see. They're the Mexican or Belizean or Guatemalan or Peruvian or Greek or Turkish or Syrian or Iraqi laborers that our projects hire specifically to do the manual labor of archaeology. Manual labor like, for example, carrying heavy objects. Highly educated white women archaeologists go to other countries, hire local men who have less education and are often men of color to do manual labor for us. And then we experience them doing that manual labor as sexist. What? And it's clear to many of those men that they are there to do manual and not intellectual labor. In his paper at last week's Society for Historical Archaeology meeting, Doug Smith told an illustrative story. He was doing fieldwork in the Peruvian Andes, and he had used oral histories given by his local collaborators to decide where to excavate. As they excavated a household, Doug voiced the hypothesis that the hearth was in the center. His colleague Maximo told him, no, it's in the corner. Doug asked what made him think that, and Maximo explained that this was his uncle's house and he had stayed there as a child. Shocked, Doug asked why Maximo had never said so, and Maximo said, you never asked. As Doug reflected in the panel discussion, the colonial structure of the American-led field project in Peru and Doug's own stated interest in finding early colonial contexts had led Maximo to believe that his own experiences as a child in the 1960s were not of any interest. Ethnographers of archaeology, Alison Mickle, Sam Holly-Klein, and Mary Layton have investigated the roles of workers on archaeological field projects in the Middle East, Mesoamerica, and the Andes, respectively. They emphasize that although archaeologists tend to see workers as primarily present to conduct manual labor so that the trained archaeologists can do the intellectual labor, workers conduct essential work for archaeology's knowledge production. The laborers are also thinkers. And on the other side, those we imagine as primarily thinkers, the professional archaeologists and students, are also laborers. Our macho cowboys of science mentality leads us to emphasize our ruggedness and physicality, braving tough environments and doing hard physical work to bring home knowledge. And it is that attitude that leads women to feel excluded and undermined when buckets are taken out of our hands. We have internalized the idea that physical strength is part of being an archaeologist. And also perhaps some of the men taking the buckets out of our hands are believing that too. And this idea is ableist. Not everyone can carry a bucket full of dirt, but that doesn't mean they can't contribute to creating archaeological knowledge. There are so many different tasks on a field project: laying out units, drawing, mapping, note-taking, excavating with a variety of different kinds of tools, screening. And then when you add the lab, there's an even wider variety of important research tasks. Not everyone has to be able to do every single one of them. On most projects, there are different roles with different responsibilities, and no one does do every single task. Why should one's value as a participant on a dig be judged by one's ability to do one single task? And why did we pick carrying buckets to be that task? Last week at SHA, I was on a panel about disability in archaeology, and I mentioned that I was working on this essay. The Zoom chat immediately exploded with discussion of buckets. Some colleagues shared stories of how they aren't able to carry buckets due to disabilities and feel undermined as archaeologists. Others told of how they had injured themselves trying to carry too heavy buckets and then therefore created or exacerbated their disabilities. Several asked why we can't use smaller buckets on our digs and why we all fill our buckets so full. And that made me remember that those buckets that Wicho was taking out of my hands were 5-gallon buckets that were full to the brim with wet, rainy season sediment. And I could have actually injured myself trying to carry them. Our culture in archaeology around buckets is a snarl of sexism, colonialism, and ableism. We operate within neo-colonial structures in which men of color are paid to do manual labor, allowing predominantly white professionals and students to do intellectual labor. Then those professionals and students must prove that they can do the manual labor as well. This division requires that the archaeologists do both manual and intellectual work, while the worker is denied the right to do the intellectual work. In a just archaeology, the tasks on an excavation would be divided based on the abilities and interests of all the participants, rather than their race, class, nationality, professional status, and gender. Because we would value all of the tasks, we would also value all of the workers who do them. Some people would carry buckets, others wouldn't. Probably the buckets would be smaller and less full. They'd definitely be less metaphorically full of complicated status symbolism. Let's build that archaeology. One way I'm working on building that archaeology is that I'm currently forming a network of archaeologists with disabilities. We're going to have a Zoom gathering in the next few weeks to get to know each other and talk about what kinds of projects we might want to work on together. If you're interested in being part of that, please send me an email. I'll put my address in the chat in a moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was amazing. That was really important as well. And it's great that we're having a variety of lenses, right? Of showing that this notion of diversity is a prism, is complex, is difficult. So this is great. And I'm going to invite Sophie Jorgensen-Rideout, is a PhD researcher at Montrepos, Germany, researching Upper Paleolithic structures and fire use. And they have been active in advocating for a more inclusive archaeology for disabled and LGBTQ plus students. So I think this goes really well with Laura's talk. Thank you so much, Sophie, and welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, Mariana. And thank you, Laura and Alex and Shadrick. They were all amazing. Just gonna get my PowerPoint up. I hope you can see that okay. So yeah, hi, I'm Sophie. I'm joining today from Germany. I just want to thank the organizer and the other panelists and everyone joining us today. It's really cool that there are so many people and so many people interested in this. I'm really excited to be here virtually and to be part of what I think will be a really interesting and hopefully really fruitful discussion. And just a heads up, but as kind of indicated by Mariana, I use they, them pronouns. So yeah, let's get started. So when I was trying to work out what to talk about here, it was really difficult because I couldn't decide which part of what I do I wanted to talk about most. Did I want to talk about my personal experience of being queer in archaeology, of being genderqueer and non-binary in archaeology, or being disabled? What was the most important or most interesting or useful to you guys? And it also felt a bit intimidating in a way, which has kind of been touched on by Alex, in that this panel offers a somewhat unique opportunity to address these aspects, to talk about them openly. And yet I felt really awkward directly addressing it. So instead, I'm going to kind of take an oblique approach. I'm going to talk a little bit about my current research, what I'm doing, and why I do it that way, and thoughts I draw from that regarding archaeology as kind of a wider discipline, and linking this back to my personal experience. So to introduce myself a bit more, as I said previously, I'm currently based in Germany at the Monorepos Archaeological Research Center and Museum, where I've just started my second year of a PhD. And my focus through my master's and into the PhD has been on fire structures, their position on site, and the relation of this to social structure and broader site structuring. So in this research, currently I'm looking at spatial structure at a selection of Russian and Ukrainian early Upper Paleolithic sites, and trying to connect the arrangement of built features such as pits and halves to site spatial organization, and from that to the movement of the body on site and the accompanying social structure. And I'm just using QGIS to help me digitize and standardize site plans from earlier in the 20th century to allow a comparison between them, as well as an integration of theories from architecture and geography to help me link the spatial organization and the social organization. And part of why I find this kind of research so interesting, and also probably why most of us are interested in archaeology, to be honest, I'm not going to try and pretend to be unique here, is that communities in the past fascinate me. So it's like, well, it's one of my primary aims of trying to improve our understanding of Gravetian people in Russia and the Ukraine. Through this research, I also have a bit of an opportunity to reflect on our own communities, how we structure ourselves, how we distribute power, and how we consider to belong in communities or who is people. You can tell I've spent a lot of time alone this year when I've been thinking about this stuff. So I think we all are familiar with the idea that the past acts as a mirror of our present, that much of our description and interpretation of the archaeological record ends up reflecting our own current power dynamics and our perception of power and inequality. And then what can be interesting to me is to try and imagine a reverse of this, to imagine a diverse, anarchic, community-focused and equal Paleolithic, and how this could reflect back onto our current lives. Yeah, to do this. But of course, I don't just do this type of research because it lets me daydream about an equal Paleolithic and future. Part of the reason I do this particular research is because it's the research I can do. Due to the historic nature of the institute I work in, we have a very well-equipped paleo library, and that allows me to work comprehensively with underutilized and pre-published data. That's particularly useful for me personally due to long-standing physical health issues. Excavation can be a bit of an unreliable strategy for me. And of course, this year researching in a kind of coronascape calls for a flexible, available data set that doesn't require travel. And that's been a really important element of designing my research questions and methods. Originally, I also planned for a trip to Russia to participate in one of the ongoing excavations and view material, but obviously we've had to kind of reconsider and postpone that on an unknown timescale. desk-based research or like anything where you're not working directly with materials, it always sounds a little less flashy. And we always use the word sexy, but I hate that. So it just sounds less flashy. But realistically, this research is typically more physically accessible, more flexible, more affordable, and it also provides an opportunity to tackle some really outdated interpretations and kind of like conceptual zombies in archaeology. But it also still feels a little kind of archaeology light, especially when we're talking to other students and researchers. When I talk to other people and they're off doing amazing excavations and I'm like, I sit at my desk with a pile of books. It feels a little of a letdown. And it kind of led me thinking that archaeology isn't always easy in that respect, that doing archaeology can be painful, both physically and emotionally, when you don't belong in what I'm going to call the template of an archaeologist. And this has been touched on by the previous speakers, and I'm just going to go more on about it. We know what I'm talking about here. White, English-speaking, cisgender, skinny, neurotypical, not obviously queer, without disability, publishes in high-impact journals, gets fancy funding. That's what the perfect archaeologist is when we picture them. And this isn't just speculation, we know this. So from Profiling the Profession, 2012, 2013, that Alex mentioned, we know that UK archaeology as a small case study is 98.2% recorded as non-disabled, only male or female participants are recorded, and 99% of paid staff are recorded as white, with 97% of volunteer staff recorded as white. And we expect certain things of ourselves as archaeologists: to be able to dig, to participate in excavations, to fit neatly into commercial research, to remain physically well or non-disabled, to drink, to be white, straight, cis, to be excited about what we're doing despite the fact that we are underpaid, left out, and that our own image of archaeology harms us. And it harms all of us in different ways. And it begins to tap into the worry that I think a lot of us have. If I talk about the fact that I don't fit in the template, does it detract from me being a proper archaeologist? Are we less of an archaeology because of this? Are we archaeology light? Are we punished for non-compliance? And looking at archaeology as a whole, I can kind of suggest as an anthropologist that when we don't fit this template, we cross the boundary from archaeologist and we become closer to the subject, something unscientific, and then a deviance to be excluded. So as a few examples, and these aren't necessarily bad things, they're just questions we as archaeologists ask. We look for warrior burials that have a female skeleton. We look for burials of disabled people and then say, were they really part of the community? We look for markers of ethnicity and origin and say that they're the other. And these are kind of all okay-ish questions, but we do all this without questioning what we as archaeologists and what our institutes and funding bodies are doing to support gender diverse people, disabled archaeologists, and people of color in archaeology. We see these as topics of research and not our lived reality. So coming back to the archaeological mirror I mentioned at the start, when we look at the archaeological record and we see all this diversity and then we look around us and we don't, we need to question it. We need to make it that not excavating, being gender diverse, being in pain doesn't make me less of an archaeologist. And then beyond words into the actions, we need to make sure that our research groups and institutions are diverse in a way that reflects our reality and are diverse in a way that supports and continues that diversity through funding, through interested people who are willing to put in the time and the effort and are supported by the institutions to do this. And then by that, we can make sure we're not cutting off parts of ourselves to fit the template of an archaeologist. So kind of to bring it back to the start, when I look in the Paleolithic, I can imagine that they didn't have or need templates, that they saw each person as an individual and that each person belonged regardless. And it really encourages me to keep reimagining and working for an archaeology that reflects that. I hope everyone else finds something similar in their own archaeology. So thanks again for listening, and thank you for the organizers and other panelists.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Again, these are amazing experiences and points of view. And I also like to acknowledge and thank to all the participants and audience members who are being honest and sharing with us in the chat. I know it sometimes does take some courage to say things, but things need to be said and we need to acknowledge them. So thank you so much. And now I would like to invite our final speaker, Bill. So Dr. William White is an assistant professor at the University of California and specializes in the historical archaeology of the African diaspora, historic preservation, and community-based research. He recently wrote an article in Sapiens on why the whiteness of archaeology is a problem. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I'll try to share my screen. You'll have to bear with me. I have technical difficulties. All right, can you all see my screen as full screen now? Okay, the funny business has now been solved. Start my timer. All right, first, I appreciate everyone inviting me here to give this talk. My name is Bill White. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Right now, I am joining from my home in Hercules, California, which is on unceded land of the Muwekma, Kark, and Ohlone people. This land was not obtained through a treaty. It was seized, and Muwekma Ohlone folks are still fighting to be the stewards and the rightful guardians of this land. I also, the talk I'm going to give just now, it really comes from my own background and my own ancestrage of, individuals living in the United States from Europe and from Africa. So what you're about to hear is really coming from my own position as someone who's living in the United States of African descent. And then I just want to tell folks that I'm going to show a talk that has some images that might be shocking, that have Confederate imagery and also anti-Semitic Nazi imagery. So if that bothers you, perhaps maybe take a couple minutes and come back and join us for the discussion. All right, if you were watching the news, you probably know that on January 6th, a group of right-wing Trump supporters broke into the US Capitol building in Washington, DC. And in the process, one person was killed directly as part of this, and a few other individuals died afterwards of various other causes. So individuals did die in this uprising, and it was fueled by individuals who have a strong conservative right-wing political perspective. The treatment of those, so this entire uprising comes after an entire year of race uprisings that happened throughout 2020 in response to attack violence by police officers and other law enforcement. And so, the last few months have kind of reached a crescendo where individuals are breaking into our federal buildings, something that hasn't been done since 1914, thank goodness, or 1814, thank goodness they didn't do what the British did and burn the building down. But it brings up bigger questions of the differential treatment of this group of individuals who are mostly of European descent and the activists, which were led by African Americans. In that, in the first couple of days after this, only 82 individuals had been arrested. More arrests have taken place since then, and individuals have turned themselves in. But in the couple of days during the height of our 2020 race uprisings, more than 400 individuals had been arrested across the United States. So I also bring this individual up. His name is Josiah Colt, and he is from the place where I'm from. I'm from the state of Idaho, Boise, Idaho. This individual is from the same community where I am. He's 34 years old, so he's only a few years younger than me. I won't tell you how old I am, but he drove almost 2,400 miles, so almost 4,000 kilometers, about 38,000 kilometers, all the way from Idaho to be part of this riot. And he also has a long history of sharing things on the internet that include conspiracy theorists, comparing things associated with the mask mandates of COVID to Nazi Germany. And he's part of a large group of individuals that are using social media to organize their thoughts and to gain information and spread information. So this really strikes home to me because I do research in Idaho. I have family, Black folks that are in Idaho. And right now, Idaho is experiencing a strong upsurgence of not just right-wing politics, but also hate crimes, anti-Semitism, and anti-government activism. So the state of Idaho is over 90% white. There's about 1.7 individuals who live in the entire state. And you can see as far as the politics, they are heavily aligned along right political themes. The state was overwhelmingly won in this last election by Donald Trump. But this goes further because this kind of idea, this political position is widespread in the United States. So you can see California, where I live right now, overwhelmingly went for Joe Biden, but you can see more than 5 times as many people as voted for Trump in Idaho also support Donald Trump in the state of California. So these ideas are deeply seated in the United States. And when we go back to Idaho, you can see this upsurgence of anti-Semitism and calling upon Nazi imagery and Nazi memes in the kind of activism against diversity and integration. Here you can see where they have vandalized the Anne Frank Memorial in the city of Boise, which is the only Jewish memorial in public spaces in the city of Boise. So the question, you know, for someone like me who's doing work there, that's doing African diaspora archaeology in the United States, you know, I originally said, how do we reach these folks? But now I'm kind of thinking like, do we even try to reach these folks? Can archaeology exist in a society where there's so many people who have such a hardcore right-wing extreme worldview? And then, you know, as someone who does community archaeology, how can I use archaeology to heal some of the wounds in places like Boise, Idaho? More than half of the world is connected to the internet in some way. And as we can see over the last few years, there's been an increase in the use of mobile devices, and social media plays an important role in this too. And it's important for us as archaeologists because, you know, for years we have been publishing in peer-reviewed journals and writing books and giving talks like this, but the real interaction of our society is increasingly taking place on phones. And it doesn't matter where you're at in the world, more people are connected. And these mobile phones or these mobile devices are the way that folks are spreading information. So as archaeologists, you know, we need to get into this. I'm definitely an advocate of doing more connection on the internet, but also know that we are entering an environment where the same things that I was just talking about, anti-diversity, racial inequality, all these things are also taking place on those same platforms and in those same systems. And in the United States, you know, what we're seeing is actually just a symptom of the overall illness of the United States, the American condition, right? Our racial hierarchies in this country were created through colonialism. They are outgrowths of older European concepts of how to separate individuals and to divide up power and access to political and legal and social power. So the idea in the United States was there was a hierarchy set up of individuals who were of European heritage, and even within that, there are hierarchies too. And the entire goal is for the elites to have differential access to political and economic power. And what we're seeing right now is the you know, the fruition of 400 and something years, generation after generation of these ideas being perpetuated that are now being thrown into a social media landscape that can both accelerate and concentrate these memes, but also divide us away as individuals in a community into more and more targeted silos. For the kind of work that I do, I long have believed that community-based participatory research is a kind of way that we can embed ourselves in communities, and by creating an inclusive atmosphere, we can also create this kind of space where folks in places like Idaho can address these violent and difficult issues. It's kind of an exposure therapy for people in this space where they're only being fed one form of information, to actually connect with other folks in their community and to learn that this is actually the reality of where they are at, that they are part of a much larger community that has a much more diverse background. I mean, that's definitely one way that folks can be exposed to the kind of ideas ideas and ideologies that have resulted in the world that we live in today, but also it can provide a space for folks to talk about these kind of things that, as other commenters have said, a lot of times go under the radar. We don't really talk about this kind of stuff. But in a larger scheme, it can create an opportunity for individuals to offer their knowledge and share their things with archaeologists. So the whole goal is to try and help people move through these difficult issues, because skirting around the edges is not working. That's not something that's helped the United States move forward. The only way is by confronting who we are and the complicated systems that are going on in our society. So as archaeologists, we have to delve into this system, and it is connected with all of the other things that we've been doing too. It's connected to the academic journal writing, our positions as archaeologists, the research that we do. But when it comes to getting this information out to the rest of the world, we have to immerse ourselves in this rapidly growing and increasingly influential atmosphere on social media and on the internet. And so we can kind of merge these different things together to connect that general public to our archaeological knowledge. And if we position ourselves in the right way, it'll help us move much further than this traditional peer-reviewed journal stuff that we've been doing. But also, by joining forces with people in our community, we can become activists for equity and for diversity and inclusivity. So 2021 was like pouring jet fuel on this existing thing, because BIPOC archaeologists did exactly that. We launched into cyberspace. We started to give more talks. Right now, what you're seeing right now, the conversation that you're now part of, is part of this. Being freed from actually having to be in the same room together has opened up whole new doors for all of us to kind of share and collaborate together. So some of the things that you can do as individuals, I always recommend individuals start with themselves, because we all came as products of the societies in which we were born. We live in the world in which we live, in this time and space. The opportunities that are available to us now were not available before. There'll be even greater opportunity in the future, but the key is to start where we're at right now. So think about, if you want to be an anti-racism and a pro-diversity advocate, think about what this life and this culture has done to you first. Start in your own mind. That will actually help you move forward. The next thing is, you're part of a group of millions of individuals. You're not alone. There are a lot of people who are already advocating, not just in archaeology, but outside of archaeology. So listen to what these advocates are saying, what they're doing. Start to read the things that they read, and then read the things that those folks who created those things read. Start to follow it back through its ideological lineages, so that you can better understand what folks are talking about that are not from your same racial group, and then to meet people where they're at. And with social media and the internet, we're able to actually connect with each other in real time around the world. The thing that distance has been lessened, time is really the thing that matters. So access these things, try to pay for memberships and volunteer to try and further some of these efforts. Another key thing that is important, especially if you are a non-white individual, is to kind of work towards equanimity, because it's easy for you to constantly be in a state of rage about the inequality that's going on in the world, but that rage doesn't actually do what you want it to do. It does not move you further as an individual, and it can get in a situation where it's holding you back and hurting other people. Plus, it psychologically just keeps boiling in your mind. So I don't mean when I say equanimity, I don't mean accepting things the way that they are. Continue to move towards equity, but understand that this is part of the entire spectrum of what it means to be a human being. Those individuals who are breaking into the Capitol, that are vandalizing monuments, those people are part of your own community, and you are also part of the same community. As someone who's pushing towards diversity, you will find another individual who does not want to listen to what you say, who will strike out. And unfortunately, we have seen, as Alex just showed us, they will come for you on social media, and those are the kind of things that will happen. Just know that that is all part of this entire system, and try to cultivate your own emotional ability to remain steadfast in the face of that kind of adversity. So the other thing that's absolutely important is to watch for red flags, because if what you're doing says that it's anti-racism, but it's really focused on assuaging white guilt and making people feel better about themselves and skirting around issues so that people's fragility is not triggered and they don't feel bad about themselves, that is not anti-racism. Being uncomfortable with this is anti-racism. If you're afraid of that and you're part of systems or organizations that work towards making people feel good about themselves, that's not really anti-racism. Our institutions and society is not designed to be anti-racist. It was designed to promote racism and diversity, right? So institutions aren't racist. It's people who are going to have to push this through, and then don't stay alone. Find other people, connect however you can. Don't be alone. Just know that you aren't alone and take care of yourself. So the world that, you know, I'm doing archaeology in 2021 is not really a safe place for me as a BIPOC scholar. So the key thing is you can't ask the 1% to 2% BIPOC archaeologists to do all this work, because it actually, in fact, in the United States, is physically dangerous for me to be out on the front line. Not only do I face opposition from individuals like what I was talking about that are virulently against integration or inclusivity in Boise, Idaho, they actually harm people of color, and the law enforcement system as well harms people of color. So if you're asking us to be out there to protest and be the only one on the front line, we need all of the rest of the other archaeologists behind us. Otherwise, harm could come of us. So it's big work, but you know, if there was ever a time to do it, now is the time to get started. Thanks everyone for listening to my talk. Now I'll pass it off to the rest of the folks.
Thank you so much, Phil. This was, again, amazing. We have a lot of topics. They're quite different, which is great, right? And I hope we can give a little bit of time also for the audience to start thinking about questions, but I'm going to launch the first one. And it, of course, has to do with the word diversity, right? This is such a huge buzzword, and it has been criticized for being way too vague, way too broad. So is the word diversity meaningful or even helpful to think about the issues in our discipline? Should we be talking about diversity in archaeology even? This is a question launched for the speakers. You know, just unmute yourselves and go for it.
I use the word diversity in archaeology. As you heard when Mariana introduced me, it's in the title of my book. And there are a few reasons I do that. One is that I hope that the book will make a lot of people uncomfortable, but I also hope that they pick it up. And so if the title is buzzwordy and not too scary, then maybe people will read it and then get uncomfortable. That's a piece of it. But I tend to use this framing that there were bits and pieces of it in sort of all the talks of that our standpoints, our identities as scholars shape our interpretations of the past. And we collectively study the entire human past, which means we're studying an extremely diverse group of people, even if some of us are focused on one particular community that was not very diverse in particular ways. Collectively, as archaeologists, we're studying an enormously diverse group of people. And so we should be diverse ourselves. Now, that's just a starting point. We also have to treat each other well. We also diversity is not the end point. I also sometimes have been known to use it. I've heard the critique that we say diversity to avoid saying equity, but I've actually found sometimes it's also the other way around. So there are all these gender equity publications that have come out since Joan Jarrow's article that I mentioned from 1985 that look at gender equity issues. And sometimes they drop the word gender and say they're just looking at equity issues. And what they tend to do is take a journal over a certain period of time or a funding agency over a certain period of time and look at all the author names and say, oh, Laura, that's probably a woman. Oh, Bill, that's probably a man. And then they count those up, and then they say, oh, look, there are more men than women. And there are a bunch of problems with that, one of which is that it misgenders people who don't have a common name, have a name in a language that the person doesn't read, are trans or genderqueer, non-binary, etc. But it also just, even the folks who think that you can get at gender from someone's name don't think that you can get at race from someone's name. So we just don't even look at anything other than gender. And so then you have these like equity papers that are really just about binary gender categories. And so if you look at those over time from 1985 to the most recent articles that are coming out, you see that archaeological publications, at least in the US, are approaching gender parity. So it was like a 70-30 split back in the 80s, and now it's more like a 60-40 split or a 55-45 split in some journals. There are even a few journals that are actually at 50-50. Not the most prestigious ones, but so it goes. And so you can say we have increasing equity, but then if you look at just the women and look at like, okay, who are these women? I've done a survey that showed that the vast majority of those women, doing 40% of the publications or whatever, are straight white women. And so that's not diversity. So I've sometimes said like, gender equity is not enough. Don't say equity when you mean gender equity, first of all. And that's not enough. We have to think more broadly about diversity. So I think it can be useful to sort of take the buzzword and then subvert it. And it can be useful when we think about it intersectionally, but it's only a starting point.
Sophie or Alex, I know you were both nodding.
I hate when, and I know people are very well meaning when they do it, when they add up the men's names and women's names and heebie-jeebies bad. I think, very similar to what Laura said, like diversity is a good starting point. But I think there's also a problem of like, it's easier to get like a diverse undergraduate cohort. But I mean, this has been addressed so much that we have like the leaky pipeline that like you can have a really diverse cohort in terms of like a load of LGBTQ students, genderqueer students, students from a variety of like ethnic backgrounds, and then they slowly disappear. And they don't disappear. It's just that archaeology and like we as archaeologists don't always make a great job of supporting diversity. So it's like, it's nice to talk about diversity, but unless we put like hard cash and like actual support and solidarity behind it, it doesn't go that far. Like, and that sounds a bit negative, but
I think it depends on who's using it, because if you hear the word diversity from a business or an organization or a government agency, it's basically just to further their own interests.
And I think there's also an issue as well when you say diversity, you end up flattening all the issues. Like Laura and everyone was saying, you know, it's a good starting point, but when you get down to it, if you just approach it from a diversity standpoint, you're just filling seats with diverse people, and you're not actually, what are you doing to support them? What are you doing to have them flourish? And when you get down to it, you know, if you're saying, oh, we have a diverse cohort, okay, but you know, the things you have to do to support the people of color in your cohort are different than the people who are disabled. And of course, you know, there's overlap from there as well. So I think diversity, I don't love it. It's kind of the same feeling I have with a lot of buzzwords these days, like decolonization, where it's getting co-opted to the point where it's like, does it even mean anything anymore? And I think the problem with saying, oh, but it's a good starting point, and it is a good starting point, is when do you move beyond that? You know, we can't be continually at a starting point for however long we've been at, you know. At this point, it's a bit ridiculous. And that archaeology needs to be more proactive. And I think in a lot of ways that means moving beyond diversity to specifically saying, this is how we support and allow our colleagues from marginalized identities to, you know, flourish a bit more.
So I think diversity is a very good word. It's a very good concept. The only problem is that it has been reduced into a slogan. is just a cliche. So you say it when you don't want to change. So that is why, in terms of all the equity statements and everything, everyone talks diversity, but no one is invested in taking that walk to say, let us solve these problems. So it is used as an excuse. So the issue is just that the system is very good at coming up with the nice sounding words, but at the end of the day, nothing is done. So today we are talking about diversity. Tomorrow we might be talking about another one, and tomorrow about another catchphrase. But what has really changed? Have all these experiences that we were learning of today, will they go away? Will the situation improve? I think maybe that is also asking of us who are part of this panel and part of this discussion, that perhaps each one of us needs to take responsibility and start to influence things for the better in our own little ways. If we combine that, then maybe we can achieve that diversity.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to pick up on this point and actually, so during the panel, Unsettling the Past, Radically Reimagining Archaeological Knowledge, that was organized by the Society of Black Archaeologists on the 13th of January, there was a question that was posted in the chat by George Nicholas that caught my eye, and I would like to launch it here because it said, how do we make lasting change when the discipline of archaeology still dismisses Indigenous, feminist, and Black archaeology as political correctness, right? So how can we do this? What are your opinions on how can we change and be more actionable now in terms of archaeology and the study of the past? I'm going to start picking names.
That will be good.
William and Shadrick, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, after you. Go ahead.
No. After you, William. To break the monotony, because I just spoke. You see.
Bill, go for it. Go for it, Bill.
So one of the things I realized is that you all, it's like afternoon there, but I just woke up and I got a coffee and it's 10 a.m. It's time for us to do some stuff. So everybody else is fading on the screen right now in the UK, and I'm just revved up. Apologies, but at any rate, so there is a spectrum of like engagement levels that folks are comfortable with and willing to embark upon. So if you were just going for processual data-oriented archaeology that's aggregating things and not necessarily engaging in a lot of these political issues, that's definitely a thing that the world needs. We need folks to work on big data. We need folks to go deep and detailed work on these sites, because we're producing more knowledge than most any of us could ever digest. So I'm not ever asking all of the archaeologists to be anti-racism activists, but being aware is one critical piece. And it doesn't seem like a huge group of the folks are necessarily aware of their own position or what they're doing, or really giving any thought to it. And part of it is this stuff is difficult. So we're talking about a field that's coming from colonialism. We heard excellent talk on the role of it, exploitation. Africa, the United States is no different with Native American folks, African American folks, Mexican American communities. They built this whole thing, right, for a long time. And it really, as other folks have said, is a racial, gendered trade that has for so long portrayed this one image, that the question is, can that image in any way help the needs of the 21st century, right? We're facing big problems. And I would say in some ways that old school processual stuff, especially I'm thinking most closely with climate change, yeah, that just kind of unbiased data crunching thing can really help. but for the rest of us, right? For engagement, for the kind of things that folks are interested in, the kind of things that are going to save museums and get, you know, public dollars and get reinvestment. That old school approach is not going to work. It's just not going to work. So I personally feel like more of a kind of action anthropology approach that uses archaeological methods is, you know, the thing that most communities are looking for, right? So you use archaeology because you're an archaeologist, but you're also a scholar of human beings in the present, and you learn from the people that you're living along with and that you're working alongside, with the goal of, you know, furthering anthropological knowledge. And your specialty is archaeology of whatever sort. You know, that's the kind of thing that actually could help. But I don't really think that that old school, you know, figuring out typologies is really going to move us forward at this point.
Shadrick.
I think the major issue relates to the myth around the Western white European exceptionalism, you know, which can be traced back, you know, to the philosophy of Kant and others, and its own, you know, limitations. But unfortunately, that has percolated within the discipline of archaeology, to the extent that if we are to talk of change, then there are many things that we have to consider. So what do we mean when we talk of you know, knowledge production, right? Then there is the issue of funding, right? With funding, if you do not have a system, you know, that allows you to learn how to write good funding proposals, then you will never compete. You are eliminated. You are eliminated from regardless of how your ideas are, you know, good, novel, and so on. Then there's also the issue of review, right? So in terms of sometimes there are networks, you know, scratch my back, I scratch yours, you know, and then we circulate that. But at the end of the day, there is this network of patronage, corruption even, right? Which is linked with knowledge production, funding, review, but then it determines who is capable and who has got ability. Because on the CV now we are saying who publishes in which journals, right? Which also explains why if you are coming from a certain school, if you are a graduate of a certain school, it's very easy to make it in the world, because then there's that network. You are also going to work on issues to do with human origins. You are working on this, and next time a paper on science, and next time, you know, it doesn't matter what your individual contribution was. So with respect to that, then nothing really changes, because there are these strong networks of patronage where people are benefiting, and then they invoke those words like diversity, and nothing really changes. So one of the things that have been happening is that I sit on the board of the Bona Grant Foundation, and what we have been doing for the past year is to work on the anti-blackness, black racism policy, on the diversity policy, to the extent that we also came up with a new policy for reviews that is alert to, you know, the different biases that might, you know, that might be associated with all these reviews. And the idea is, and also opening up those calls. So, you know, like if you have an idea, it's just a bottom up. Just submit your proposal, and then we will consider it. So these are all interventions that are aimed at ensuring that we have some change. And also, how do we factor in different levels of thinking, going back to that George Nicholas question? Then one of the things that we are doing is in partnership with MIT Press, we are starting the Global South Cosmologies book series. And the aim of that is to think of, you know, of course, there's a bias to technology, but what we are hoping to do is to look at concepts, you know, some concepts in Arabic, for example, which do not have any equivalence in English or in German. how do we deal with that, and how can we construct narratives associated with that? And if we were to have that literature, if we were to have those books and so on, then the idea then is that if they end up on the course outlines, on the reading lists, then perhaps that will also be contribute to change. And hopefully, Laura, your book will also contribute to, to those changes, because we might also produce the literature, but unless we use it to teach, unless students read it, then it feels by the wayside. So a multi-pronged approach to achieving change, but we are the change. So we need to also keep these things moving in our own small ways. Thank you.
Go for it, Laura.
Yeah, thinking about this question, and I was thinking about it during that other webinar as well. I think it also raises the question of there are sort of different approaches to how we make change in the discipline, and do we talk to the people who are sending Alex hate mail when she tweets about things? Like, are those the people that we're talking to? And Bill brought this up too. Like, how much are we talking to the guy from our hometown who ended up storming the Capitol? And it reminded me of a session at the American Anthropological Association. Chelsea Blackmore and I organized a session a couple of years ago on, I think it was called Archaeology and Social Justice. I don't remember. I've organized enough things with similar titles, I lose track of them. But there was this sort of discussion going on about, like, well, are we preaching to the choir here? Is it like everyone in this room already on board? And our discussant was Dr. Uzma Rizvi, and she said there was just a lot of fretting going on in the room about how, like, this room is so much more racially diverse, contains so many more sort of visibly queer people than like archaeology conferences overall. And like, are we just talking to ourselves? And Uzma said, sometimes you have to get together in a room and talk to each other, to the people who are already in your subculture. Like, we have to strengthen each other for the fight. And like, sometimes that choir needs to get really like pumped up and ready to go do the work, and like, that's okay. And you don't want to only ever be in a room with the people who already agree with you, but sometimes, like, it's okay, everyone, like, it's okay. We can just hang out with each other and like have a really good conversation and learn from each other, those of us who are like already thinking about these issues. And I think about that every once in a while, because I do tend to find myself in bubbles. And that's true as I am louder and louder and publish more of my research. I find the people who are interested in my research, and I'm not necessarily talking to, I'm not on panels with a lot of people who like disagree with the fundamental ideas of my research. But I think that there's some power to sort of growing these communities and then sort of taking over the mainstream, like growing what's on the margins until it becomes mainstream, as someone, but I forget who, said in the Society of Black Archaeologists webinar last week, like growing what's on the margins, as opposed to like, as individual people trying to go out into the center and make change is really hard. And I see that happening in the work of the Society of Black Archaeologists over the past decade or so, that society has grown so much. And I see it like, when Dr. Chirikure talks about being on the Wenner-Gren board and making changes at Wenner-Gren. And I've been talking to the executive director of Wenner-Gren about doing some research about their granting procedures and gathering some data. And I don't think that would have, I mean, I certainly wasn't ready to do that work a decade ago, but I don't think that they were finding someone like me to do that work a decade ago. And I don't think that a decade ago, I would have had a spreadsheet on my computer of 60 people so far who want to come to a Zoom gathering of disabled archaeologists. Like, I think it's changing. And I think part of, it's slow, it's not enough, but I think we are changing. And some of that change happens because we have conference sessions and Society of Black Archaeologists and friend networks and drinks at the bar or non-alcoholic drinks with people who agree. And then we all disperse and we go back to our departments where maybe we are the only one talking about disability or race, and we do our community outreach. And so I think it has to be both. I think that the only way, like, we can't just stay in our sort of marginal bubbles and talk to each other, because then we'll never change anything. But we shouldn't shame ourselves for talking to our friends and for making friends with people who have similar values, because that's part of how we take care of ourselves and each other to then go have that fight. But I do think it's changing. I really think archaeology is in a process of change right now, and it's so exciting. It's so exciting to watch it, even as it's also like exhausting. So yeah, so I've just been thinking about the margins and the center, and that's where I've come to so far.
Thank you so much, Laura. I know I want to give time for the audience to raise questions as well, and I've been receiving several really, really interesting questions. I'm just going to pose one last question that hopefully will just kind of transition us into a different mindset when the audience comes in. And the question is basically, if you could go back in time and, you know, speak to yourselves at the beginning of your career, and we spoke a lot about education, right? Education has a huge role in this. You know, what would you tell yourself? What can you tell to the young archaeologists who are out there about diversity? You know, what would the message be for them?
Don't finish your PhD during a global pandemic, probably is the key takeaway. No, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to kind of, because when I started, I did my BA in Hunter College in New York, and it was in classical archaeology and anthropology. And it's funny because in New York, obviously, literally in Manhattan, you know, I had such a vibrant cohort of, you know, it was a majority white students, but there were so many other students of color there that it was really great, especially when we would do stuff with the anthropology students. You know, we had a really vibrant kind of community there. So moving to England, where that is not the case at all. I could count how many archaeologists of color doing their PhD on one hand, although I also am very antisocial, so maybe I'm just not really, you know, talking or meeting people. You know, and just that complete difference of, you know, obviously archaeology in general is a colonial endeavor that is rooted in ideas of white supremacy and things like that. But it was just so markedly different in England, how very white and very tied to nationalistic kind of ideals archaeology was. So I think kind of like starting out, it's just, I would just warn myself really kind of, you know, what you're getting into. One thing that I always think about, I'm at the age where when I was in college, I was on Tumblr. This one's for all the millennials out there. And I remember being very excited about starting my archaeology degree and like being on Tumblr, being like, oh, I can't wait. I'm going to be like Indiana Jones. I was like 18. And someone immediately retweeted me with, why would you be so excited to be part of such an imperial discipline? And at the time I was so upset, like genuinely crushed, so infuriated by that comment. And I was just like, you know, it's just having fun. And now I would love to kick my own ass over that because they were right. And I think that gave me the kick in the pants that eventually led me to being here in terms of, you know, especially going into it as an Asian woman, archaeology was not made for you. Archaeology was made for cis white men who were wealthy enough to have a woman at home to do most of their like writing up and things like that. Archaeology was not made for someone like me whatsoever. So it is going to be extremely hard most of the time. And, you know, a lot of it, there's not much you can do in terms of just fighting back against it. And it's not to discourage people from going to archaeology. It's just, you know, that's what it is. And that you can say that about basically any of the sciences, you know, these disciplines were not made for us to, you know, flourish in and be, you know, the top of the class in, and just going into it with that in your mind, kind of just really preparing yourself for it. I don't really know where I was going with this. I just really like talking about how I got called out when I was 18 on Tumblr, which is, you know, I think everyone should be. If anyone else wants to take this question.
Thank you, Alex. Sophie?
I don't know what I would tell. Like, because I'm kind of thinking of Alex, so I'm like first year undergrad me. The biggest thing, so literally, I started archaeology somewhat by mistake, missed my grades, got in through clearing, blah, blah, blah. First thing I did once I got access to like academic journals was searched gay archaeology, queer archaeology, because I was like, I'm not staying if there's not other people like me. And then it took me a year of being very quiet about it, despite the fact that I suffered a relatively major physical injury on my first ever excavation, which probably should have been an indicator for me that fieldwork was not going to be my hotspot. I wish that I had worked out a year and a half earlier that I could be loud about it, that I could ask for money from the faculty to support me with stuff, that I could put my pronouns on presentations, that I could ask them to do stuff. And like my faculty was amazing. They just weren't really prepared for it because I guess everyone else had been quiet about it as well. And then I spent a year being quiet because I didn't want to not be an archaeologist. This is the presentation I gave is the fear I've had for 6 years of like, if you're queer, if you're disabled, you're not going to be a real archaeologist. And I wanted so badly to be a proper archaeologist, an Indiana Jones archaeologist. And now I'm like, one, gross, probably good. I should have been called out on Tumblr too. But also that, yeah, everything that makes me a weird archaeologist is what makes me a really good archaeologist. But I wish I'd been more confident about that at the time. Maybe someone else out there will be like me. Be confident in yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, Laura, go for it. And then I'll start with the audience questions.
Yeah, mine is very similar to Sophie's, is that it's more for my first year of graduate school self than for my first year of undergrad self. I went to a very like progressive liberal arts college, and so I did a lot of like exploration of queer archaeology and feminist archaeology and stuff. And then I got to grad school, and my grad school was not super hippie liberal. Kyra's laughing, she knows. And it's, I sort of assimilated myself for the first few years to my grad program. And then I got loud in like year 5 or 6. And I wish I had done that earlier. And so I wish I could tell my first year grad student self, like, you can do the research that you love and based on the political values that you hold. You don't have to hold back from that. And in fact, holding back from that is gonna just make you miserable, and you're not gonna like succeed. That for me, I need to do that. I agree with Bill. We need people doing like big data. We need people like gathering that data, doing like really the scientific stuff. But for me, my work has to be political for me to be happy. And by trying to sort of censor that, I just made myself miserable. That didn't lead to success. So I wish I had just like thrown my heart into it and kept being that like Wesleyan hippie kid who yeah, just wanted to like make everything as queer as possible from the beginning. And I could have like, yeah, I could have just not tried to sort of assimilate, and I would have been happier. I would have graduated sooner. I would have been doing this work that I love for a lot longer. So.
Aww. Thank you
in
so
case
much,
anyone else
Laura.
needs to hear that, just do it. And people who don't support you, if people don't support you, find a different person to support you. We are out here. There are a lot of people who want to support you in doing the really cool research. That's where your heart is. And pushing through the like research that you don't love or that isn't where your heart is may not be worth it.
That's really good. Yeah, thank you. Yes, people. Important. So thank you so much, everyone. We're going to start taking the questions that we've been receiving. And Sophie, I was wondering if I could ask you the first question. What do you think about trying to find the other in the archaeological record? You know, has research on diversity in the past focused more on finding people who are somehow different and excluded from society rather than considering how they were included in society? What do you think?
Part of me feels very uncomfortable with when we talk about like finding the other or like gender diversity, like ritual gender, all this in the archaeological record, because we're printing our own picture so heavily on it, and with disability as well. And I think as you say, a much more interesting question is to say like, well, this person was still buried or they survived to adulthood. So it's a much more interesting research line, and it has a lot more potential both for like the past and also for kind of like improving your own feeling in yourself to ask like, how were they included? Like there's a Neanderthal with really severe alveolar reabsorption, so with no more teeth. And they still survived. So the other members of their community were like mashing up food for them potentially. We're like, that is so much more interesting and so much cooler than just being like, oh, this Neanderthal had bad teeth and died at an old age. To think about the mechanisms of community care and that the fact that they might not have been seen as different, that a lot of our idea of like pathology and abnormality is so driven by like capitalist consumption and production and then like colonial normality. When you discard that, you have to ask, these people were included as if they were normal or they were recognized as something exceptional rather than the other is always a bad thing. I wish we thought more about like inclusion and like exceptionality. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Shadrick, I believe the next question is for you. So the question you posed in your opening presentation was super important. Black students are good enough to be students, but are they not good enough to be faculty, right? So it seems that all departments nowadays try to promote values such as diversity, but when it comes to taking action, there are still massive problems. So what do you think they still feel at unease when employing diverse groups? You know, what's going on?
I was hoping that this question would not be asked. Anyway, so I will draw from my experience with a number of universities. So Oxford, one of them, and also, which is not diverse, by the way, and also Cape Town, which is also in a similar way. So the key thing is that why is it that we do not achieve a diversity? And one of those things is that sometimes those networks that I was talking about in terms of, you know, who is able to do what and so on. So if you don't fit into some networks, then in terms of evolution, you also fall out of the way. Okay, it's okay. That's fine. It's dinner time, but anyway, my apologies for that. So just to recap, the reason why things don't change, in my experience, is that in some cases, Black students and so on, they are not part of they are not part of faculty, they are not part of the networks, and they also don't know what do you need to do to get hired. So if you compare that to our other colleagues and so on, they will have received mentorship, and they know from day one that if I study at Cambridge and I want to be employed later on, this is what I do. This is the package that I must have. It happened when I was in graduate school that I'm finishing my PhD, and my colleague, we were the same cohort. Yeah, because they had done all this, it was then they joined, they became faculty. Then you say, oh, so this is how things are done. Do we also disseminate information? Because this also speaks to education. So when we talk about diversity, all these experiences that we were talking about today, how do we share them more widely? If we educate people, then it means that with more Black people, if you have a person of color, someone from Asia and so on, they are joining Harvard, and you tell them at the very first instance, this is how this place works, right? This is how you hold on to the ropes, right? By the end of the year, for you to be able to do this and that, this is what you need to do, right? Will people then, it means that we are setting them up for success. That is one of the things that is also missing, in addition to the lack of inaction from the establishment and so on. So I'm also saying what we also need to do is how do we educate others? How do we make these vital lessons we are talking about, how do we ensure that others also benefit from them, so that they know, well, if they are feeling challenged, excluded, rather than saying, oh, maybe this is the way in which things are done here, and keep quiet. How do we ensure that they stand up? Because when they step up, they are also benefiting 20, 100 more others. And with that, that is how we are also going to get change. So that is what I also do everywhere I work. That is why if you look at the trail of the students that I have, you will see that I have quite a number of students, from all backgrounds are following me where I go. It is also because of that. And that is something that I think if we do that, then we will be able to apply more pressure to persuade and also have honest conversations. So, and to say, look, things here are not nice. Let us change them. Let us change them for the better. Yes, we have those honest conversations, certainly within Oxford. And there are many things that we are doing as a result of that. Whether that will result in the real change, that is another thing. But the most important thing is that something is being done. And my last point is that we are also working with the Society for Black Archaeologists, Pan-African Congress for Archaeologists, and others, just to debate these issues. How do we Africanize African archaeology? How do we decolonize it? How do we come up and the University of Oxford has made that money available for that to be possible. So very soon we will be advertising that, drawing people from all over. So this was again a result of those honest conversations. And then the university saying, okay, we can set aside these resources to achieve this goal. So multi-pronged strategy, again, no one thing will work, but if we try this and we also do our part and work with others, then I think we will get there.
Thank you so much. Professor Bell, would you also like to say something? Because you've been very involved in trying to reconceptualize this education, right, in archaeology.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Dr. Chirikure came up with some great realizations that we should internalize, that we need to just change the idea of who's the expert and who's the student, right? Because I mean, a lot of us go into communities and we go to these sites and we think that we know a bunch because we read a bunch of books or dug a bunch of holes in the ground. But the people who live there are the ones who are the descendants for hundreds of generations in this location. They're the ones who you might want to start with first before the first trowel even touches earth, to try and figure out, what are the directions that you should be thinking about, and how many of your preconceived research design ideas are just craziness that came from some article from 1952. Like, I mean, that's starting first. Who are the experts and the holders of knowledge? Because there's more than one kind of way of knowing, and archaeology is just only one kind of way. And when we try to integrate some of those other ways, then our work gets much better. It goes way beyond just, potsherds and bones and, broken ceramics. It turns into something that people can actually connect with. So when it comes to diversity in universities are companies that take generations to change, right? Because that same system that produced all the professors we have now, we seriously have to wait 20 to 40 years for all of the professors to essentially retire, or move to new pastures before we can even have others come up, not just join the faculty, but take governance over the department. And so what we're talking about is an intergenerational thing that's going to, take much longer than our human lives. However, changing knowledge production, that can happen like the very next project. I mean, that could be happening right now in your grant proposal before you even do it. So I think that the impact can be swift if we start including more individuals' knowledge into our work. If we sit and wait for all the government agencies and universities to change, we're not going to, maybe our great grandchildren might see 5% movement, because that's the forces we're dealing with here.
Thank you so much. We did have a question on, how can we as students, as junior scholars, actually help change this narrative besides waiting for people to, for the expression, to die off, or, what can students do, besides just writing campaign letters and signing things. So that's also a really good approach to it. If anyone else has any ideas, and suggestions of what can we do as students to help change these narratives, that would be great. I'm gonna scroll through my chat. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the rest of the questions. So that would be something I would love to know. And I can read the entire question. A lot of this discussion about diversity and making archaeology more diverse is now taking place, but on a low level, like here at the student conference or in other similar conferences. So when it gets brought up in larger places, it gets shut down. And we have, for instance, the AIA lectures. We have people having to stop talks because of Zoom bombers, and these are sometimes from senior scholars. So again, how can we as students help to change this narrative, besides waiting for people to die off, or just besides writing campaign letters or signing letters? So if anyone has any suggestions.
I would say, first of all, don't wait, push your department to act, but also don't wait for them to act. Just start doing your own thing. You don't have to wait for your peers, your mentors to show up ever. They may never actually get there. And so if you don't want to wait 40 years for all of us to retire, then just start doing your own thing today. Start right away with changing your own thoughts and the way that you think, because that is going to influence your work and what you write in their classes and what you read and don't want to read and what's being taught and everything that's actually being, done. So if you look around, it's not universities that are out there on the Black Lives Matter protest. It was not, for the most part, university professors that were smashing into the US Capitol. It was people from communities and towns. So, I think years later, we'll see books come out on this. We'll see articles. We're starting to see some research on this stuff with archaeology right now. And, that's things, right? But if you actually really want to make change, don't wait for us. All your professors all have bills and mortgages and everything to pay. And we're looking out for that kind of stuff, right? You have bills, you have other things, and you're looking out for your own thing that you want to see done. So don't wait. If it doesn't exist, build it. And then make sure that when you build it, let them know it's not really for you. I didn't build this for you. I built it for me because it didn't already exist. So now I have this thing and you can sit back and watch what I'm doing here. And maybe some of what I've got will rub off on you. Don't wait.
To add on to what William is saying, when you also become professors, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the issues that you were raising. So you need to be to practice that, because very often revolutions die because people are co-opted, and when people join in, then they forget that, oh, I have my colleagues I was previously struggling with this. So yeah, let us be the change that we want to be.
No, I think this was amazing. This was really, really important, right? So we can all do our parts. We don't have to all wait for others. It's great if we have a support network, but we can also try to do change for ourselves and go for it. And I think if no one else has a last minute question, we're 1 minute from closing the session. So I would start by bringing us back and recentering us, because we went around and we talked about very, very different things. Belle, would you like to say something? Oh, okay. No, don't worry.
Sorry.
I'm just like, whenever someone unmutes himself, so if you do want to say something, please go ahead, okay? Just don't mind me. But anyway, I want to recenter yourselves again, because this was important. And I think we touched upon a lot of different aspects that I hope are the beginning of things, okay? And before I wrap up, Laura, would you like to share some of the initiatives you're gonna,
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my talk, but Mariana kindly is giving me a moment at the end, right before you all leave, to put it at the front of mind. I'm creating a network of disabled archaeologists. I'm going to be sending out an email to everyone who's expressed interest tomorrow to find a time we can all gather on Zoom and talk about what we might like this to be. Is this a social group? Is this a book club? Is this a advocacy group? Are we trying to find research collaboration? Are we trying to find mentorship? Like, what do we all want? And it can be anything. I don't have one clear vision. I want to know what fellow disabled archaeologists want out of an organized community. So if you're interested, please shoot me an email and I will add you to my big email out tomorrow. So yep, my email address is in the chat.
Thank you so much, Laura. So everyone, recentering, remember? So what have we been doing here? We have engaged in multiple intersectional conversations on diversity. We had colonialism, we had racism, sexism, cisnormativity, ableism, which I still don't know how to pronounce, and I'm terribly sorry. We had mental health in the disciplines of archaeology and heritage. While this might be the closing event of CASA 2021, the purpose today is to inspire you to enact change. Okay, so how will you, as participants, as fellow speakers, carry what we have discussed to here into your own lives? How will you proceed into your lives as archaeologists, as experts who deal with the past in the present, as community members, and as fellow human beings? So, go out there and make a difference. And let us give a round of virtual applause to everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And now I proclaim the panel, Diversity in Archaeology, closed.